Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Our top focus is on Sudan. The Sudanese army has launched its biggest offensive in months to regain control of areas lost to the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF. Smoke engulfed the skies of Khartoum as the army launched artillery and airstrikes in the capital. At least 4 people have reportedly been killed and at least 14 have been wounded. Locals said they witnessed heavy bombardments and clashes when army troops tried to cross 3 key bridges over the Nile River that separate parts of Khartoum held by the army from those under RSF control. As per reports, army forces were able to cross the bridges. However, the RSF has denied the claims. The paramilitary RSF has occupied nearly all of the Sudanese capital since the civil war erupted in April last year. Sudan's army-backed government is currently based in Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast. This is the army's first major offensive since February, when it regained much of Omdurman, the capital's twin city across the Nile and part of Greater Khartoum. The RSF, meanwhile, control nearly all of the vast western region of Darfur. It has also rampaged through the agricultural heartland of central Sudan and has further pushed into southeast. An intense battle is ongoing for the city of al-Fasher, where the RSF launched a large-scale offensive after months of siege last weekend. Now, in the latest, at least 18 have reportedly been killed in the RSF attack on a local market in the city. Al-Fasher is the capital of the North Darfur state and is the only one of 5 state capitals in Darfur not yet in the hands of the RSF. Now, the Sudanese army offensive in Khartoum came just ahead of an address by its commander, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. In his address, the army chief demanded for the rebel RSF to be designated as a terrorist group. He accused the RSF of obstructing peace efforts. Al-Burhan also accused unnamed countries in the region of providing the RSF with financial support, weapons, and political cover.
Countless crimes have been committed: ethnic cleansing, forced displacement, and genocide. All of this has been committed by the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, which should be considered a terrorist group. This militia is continuing to perpetrate crimes, and it is most unfortunate that it is receiving the support of some countries in the region, countries which are providing funding and mercenaries for their own political and economic benefit, in flagrant violation of law and international will.
The Sudanese army has repeatedly accused the United Arab Emirates of backing the RSF, allegations that the Arab nation denies. The army also rejected to participate in the US-led peace talks in Geneva last month due to the UAE's presence and the format of the talks. As per the World Health Organization, at least 20,000 people have been killed in the Sudan civil war. However, some estimates put the death toll up to 150,000. It has also created the world's largest displacement crisis, with more than 10 million people uprooted from their homes. How will the latest escalation impact the possibility of a ceasefire? Now, for more on this, we have with us Musa Mdunge, an international affairs expert who is joining us from Dundee in the UK. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Musa, what are the primary objectives of the Sudanese army's latest offensive against the RSF in Khartoum?
Well, as you've so wonderfully put it, in that visual of the map, the army, the military in Sudan, unfortunately, does not hold much control over the regional capitals, including Khartoum as the national capital of Sudan. And this latest offensive is a bid for the military under al-Burhan to reclaim a certain level of legitimacy strategic legitimacy as it enters into these multiple sort of negotiating spaces. We know, for example, that the United States is holding on the sideline of the United Nations negotiation talks in order to reach a ceasefire. And it is my view that al-Burhan seeks in this offensive to really improve, the military's negotiation position and power and bargaining power as it enters these talks. It is clear that the RSF is in the dominating position in terms of the conflict currently, and in many ways, the military, which sees itself as the legitimate voice of the Sudanese government, is trying to re-establish a certain level of legitimacy. The problem with this, Alison, is indeed the same one we find when we think of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where both sides seek to one-up the other militarily as a way of improving their diplomatic negotiated positions. And in this case, I believe we are seeing the very same thing unfold, because it's unsurprising that in that very same UN address, he then goes on to speak about a road towards a peaceful settlement of conflict and a move towards negotiations. While moving on this offensive, to many, it may seem like a contradiction, but to me, it really is in line with that grander diplomatic strategy.
Right. And how has the international community responded to the escalation of conflict between the Sudanese army and the RSF?
Well, this is where it really gets interesting, right, Alison, is that the international community is quite fragmented in terms of its view of this particular conflict and in terms of its support for both sides. We know, for example, that the UAE has been accused of supporting the RSF, both with logistical and material support, including supporting the exports of gold, which UAE is a key market for that. And the money produced from those exports has been said to be used in terms of buying military armaments, rearming the RSF, and therefore escalating the conflict. Both the United States and the United Nations broadly have condemned the conflict, have called for a cessation of conflict and a move towards a negotiated settlement. But unfortunately, given that, different sides have vested interests in this particular conflict, this is coming to bear in the way the international community has really tried to coordinate a negotiated settlement. You have, for example, the United States and the UN, and as well as the AU on one side pursuing some sort of a negotiated settlement, but at the same time, you have Egypt, for example, that is a major player in that particular conflict, of course. Understandably, because you've had about 500,000 Sudanese refugees crossing over the border between Sudan as well as Egypt. And from a grander regional perspective, players like Ethiopia, for example, have also entered the fray, because this conflict is really just but a silo in a bigger sort of vacuum of regional conflict that is facing that particular area of Africa.
Absolutely, Musa. So you have touched on the impact of the conflict on the civilian population in the surrounding areas and, of course, in Khartoum. What are the potential long-term implications of this offensive for the stability and the future of Sudan and the region?
Well, I mean, to start off in Sudan, of course, we know that there's been this growing humanitarian crisis. Thousands of people who have been killed, more than 14 million misplaced around that particular region. And the challenge for the region is that a country like Sudan, where there's no stable government, becomes a hotbed for different militias to rise, for terrorist networks to develop. And we know that that region has really seen a lot of conflict and huge machinations of different types of militias rising up. But also from an economic perspective, it poses long-term challenges to the stability of the region. When one considers, for example, this grand Renaissance dam that is being developed by Ethiopia, which both Sudan and Egypt see as a threat to their own sort of food security and access to the Nile. And so this war poses a logistical and very practical threat, both to Sudan's security, food security, humanitarian security, but as well as Egypt. And let's not forget the strategic importance that Egypt has as a transcontinental country, and one which controls, for example, the one which controls major trading routes between Europe as well as the rest of Asia. And so conflict in Sudan is quite problematic for global trade as well. And so unless the global community sort of comes together and really sees this conflict for what it is, as a major, major conflict that has the potential to really interrupt global trade flows, perhaps we'll then start to see this particular conflict being given a greater focus in the same way, for example, the Israel-Hamas conflict has been given focus.
Absolutely. Musa, it's always great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much.